As of the making of this video, I have been Catholic for a little over 2 years. Prior to this, I lived in the world of Judaism as a Messianic Jew. A lot of people ask me how I ended up where I am today and why it is that I left Judaism. Well, that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Are you ready? Let's go. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, The Jewish Catholic. My name is Daniel. And as I mentioned, today I want to talk to you about why I left the world of Judaism. Now, I have talked about my story in several videos before, in other channels and in my own, but I wanted to break this one down because I still get so many people coming in from the world of Messianic Judaism and a lot of people that are leaving evangelical Christianity going into this world of Messianic Judaism. And it sounds so right to them, and I understand it because I used to be there, but I feel that now is the time for me to tackle this issue because I see it as a growing problem in the world of the believers. A quick disclaimer as I make this video, however, the same way that I addressed the folks in the world of Protestantism in general, I want to address the people that are also involved in Messianic Judaism and in Judaism. This video is not an attack on the individuals that are part of these groups. This video is simply to highlight the issues that I found within the movements themselves. Not any particular individual and not against you if you are part of these movements. All right, with that out of the way, let's dive into why I left Messianic Judaism and Judaism in general. Ironically, a lot of the reasons why I left Judaism are very similar to the reasons I left Protestantism prior. But this was more specific regarding the issue of authority. You see, while for a lot of people, they may see Judaism as a monolith, it's really not. If you're familiar with the world of Judaism, you will see that there are several groups and many subgroups within the larger ones. To give you an example, within Judaism, there are 4 different main categories that are usually talked about. We're talking about Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, and Ultra-Orthodox Judaism. Within those, there are different groups depending on what community you come from. For example, you may be an Ashkenazi Jew, or you may be a Sephardic Jew, you may be a Yemenite Jew, and there are other subcategories as well. Depending on your mix and blend of Judaism, you're going to have things that are different. For example, in the world of the Sephardic Jews, there are things that you are able to eat during the time of Pesach that are considered completely kosher, whereas for somebody who is in the Ashkenazi world, they're going to say, we do not eat those things. They are against the Torah that we have been given. Going into other branches of Judaism, when you want to contrast, for example, a Reformed Jew and somebody who might be in the Orthodox realm, you will see many discrepancies. For example, for the Reformed, they may not see the Torah as something God-given. They might see it in part as a moral code, but more simply as part of the Jewish heritage, which means that for many people within that sphere, they will not necessarily adhere to Judaism as a whole. They might cherry pick here and there what parts they like and what things they don't. Whereas somebody in the Orthodox world would be much more strict regarding the commandments that they would keep and in the way that they keep it. If you take the conservative Jews, many of them would drive in Shabbat because they don't consider it to be against the laws of Shabbat. Whereas for an Orthodox Jew, they would consider it as lighting a fire, which is breaking one of the things that they consider to be against the Shabbat. And therefore, these two groups have completely different views on how to observe the Shabbat. What is work? What is rest? And what are the things that you can do in between? I know that for somebody looking from the outside in, it may not seem like a big deal, but I promise you, if you're in the world of Judaism, you will know that these can be very controversial. When you go into the world of Messianic Judaism, which is essentially Judaism but believing that Yeshua is the Messiah, there is no lack of issues there as well. Now, for me, when I was living in the world of Messianic Judaism, one of the things that I loved to do was to visit different communities. I loved fellowship. I loved being able to travel to different congregations and go to different cities, go to even different states in the United States, and be able to speak with these people and see how they ended up where they are now, what the goal is for the faith, how they keep the faith, and all of these different aspects that I thought were beautiful. As I continued in my travels and looking into these different communities, I noticed that similarly to plain old Judaism, where there are different branches, different categories, and many conflicts, the same thing was happening in Messianic Judaism, but in different forms. For example, if you look at Messianic Jewish communities, you will see that some will believe that Yeshua is divine, that God is a triune God, whereas other communities will deny the Trinity and say that it is actually heretical and that comes from pagan origins. You would look at one community that believes that keeping kosher is strictly what you see in the book of Leviticus chapter 11, while another group would think, no, we need to adhere to what the rabbis say. Some people will say this is how you observe Shabbat, and some people will say, no, that's not what is supposed to be done, and that's not how you're supposed to keep it. It's this way. Some folks will observe a lunar calendar, while others will stick to the more traditional rabbinic calendar. And again, as I mentioned, for the world of Judaism, in Messianic Judaism, these things were a big deal. And I know that for somebody looking from the outside in, it may not seem like a big deal, but I promise you, these are a big deal. And of course, there were other finer points regarding purity laws. What happens if the temple is rebuilt? What happens to the priesthood? What do we do then? All of these issues and all of these questions led me into wanting to search into who the authority actually is in the world of Judaism and Messianic Judaism. And this took me into wanting to look more deeply into Jewish literature, looking into things such as the Shulchan Aruch or the Mishneh Torah, which are basically books of codified Jewish law. I started looking into things such as the Talmud, going then more strictly into the Mishnah, looking into even more Kabbalistic or more mystical sources such as the Zohar. And as I started looking into these different things, I noticed that again, there were discrepancies. The Shulchan Aruch has this very Ashkenazi flavor. And when I look at the Mishneh Torah being composed by the Rambam, it's going to have a more Sephardic view to Judaism. And even within the texts themselves, for example, in the Talmud, you will notice that it was composed basically as a back and forth between different rabbis and different sages, where Rabbi so-and-so would say, this is how we do this, while another rabbi or another sage would say, but I have heard it said that we should do it this way. So even within the text itself, it doesn't hide the fact that it's a back and forth, it's a conversation, it's an argument trying to get into the bottom of what should be done in what way. And of course, many Christians will probably be familiar with the fact that there were also two grand schools in the thought of Judaism. You had the house of Hillel and you had the house of Shammai. And both of these were not always in accordance. So looking into these things, I was thinking, man, not only is it these modern day communities having a struggle, but even those communities back then, and at least way back in the Mishnaic times, there was a high court, the Beit Din Hagadol, or what might be known now as the Sanhedrin. But in modern day Judaism, you don't have that great court. You don't have a centralized and universal authority for Judaism or Messianic Judaism. You don't have a temple. You don't have the priesthood. You don't have a sacrificial system. So this modern day Judaism is an illegitimate response to the destruction of the temple and the temple worship complex that used to exist in the time of Yeshua. And I bring this up because for a lot of the people that start looking into Messianic Judaism or even outside of the Messianic aspect and going into Orthodox Judaism, there are some questions that are not being properly answered. For example, the fact that there is no temple and no priesthood and no court and no sacrificial system means that whatever we are doing today is a man-made response. It was not sanctioned by God. And of course, many rabbis try to argue about, we do this, for example, we do the prayers and we do almsgiving, we do tzedakah, and we do all of these different rituals that we do as a response to the fact that we don't have the sacrifices. But that, again, is a man-made response. God never said, okay, now that the temple is destroyed, you can choose whichever way you want to keep my laws and what laws to keep. For a lot of Jews, for example, they don't even go to Jerusalem to be able to keep the feasts. Of course, there's no temple there. But even so, feasts like Pesach and other feasts that required some type of pilgrimage to the Holy Land, they cannot be done, and they are not done by all the different Jewish communities. Additionally, there's no way to actually keep purity laws in the way that they were meant to. There is no way to observe the feasts such as Yom Kippur, which require a high priest, that require the temple, that require all of these different aspects that just simply have not existed for 2,000 years. And I dive more into this topic of the priesthood and the temple and the ritual sacrifices in another video. It's a really old video, but I'll link it because it still has a lot to do with the topic that we're talking about today. Make sure you check that one out after this one. So now, noticing that this modern day Messianic Judaism and Judaism was improper and illegitimate response to ancient temple time Judaism, the Judaism that Yeshua would have been familiar with, I started to think, wait a second, if this is not the response, what was the proper response? And I noticed I was looking only into ancient Jewish sources that denied Jesus's messiahship. So shouldn't I be looking into the ones that actually did follow Yeshua? Let's look into the apostles. Let's look into the students of the apostles, and let's continue down the line and see where it leads. It was in that very journey that I ended up discovering the apostolic fathers. These are the students of the apostles. And I'm talking about folks such as St. Clement of Rome, which is attributed to being a student of both Peter, Kepha, and Shaul, Paul. I'm talking about people such as Polycarp, a student of John, and St. Ignatius of Antioch. When I started looking into them and I started looking into ancient writings such as the Didache, a writing attributed to the disciples outside of Scripture, I started looking at all these church fathers, the early church fathers, and I noticed the trend that they sounded very much like what I see in the Catholic world. And lo and behold, the more I looked into it, the more I started getting the answers to those questions, such as the Shabbat, for example, which was a huge deal for me. And I know that is a huge question for a lot of people out there as well that are looking into the ancient roots of the faith. I started looking into the answers for the priesthood, the answers for the sacrificial issue. What do we do with the sacrifices or the lack thereof? And as I did that, I bumped into the matter of the Eucharist. And I have made a video about that as well. So I'll go ahead and link that up there. So make sure to check that out as well. Little by little, as I restudied the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, and all these early believers, I started to see a more congruent picture, one that made more sense and was a proper and fluid response to what we see in temple time Judaism and what we see today in Catholicism. So many questions were answered that it really actually freaked me out in the beginning because I didn't want to believe that Catholicism was the truth. But the more I started looking into it, the more I became convinced and convicted that Catholicism truly is the continuation and fulfillment of temple time Judaism. After watching this whole video, I'm sure that many of you have many comments, many questions, so make sure you share them with me in the comment section below. Again, this video was not meant to be an attack to anybody. It's mainly targeted for the people that are looking into Messianic Judaism, into the Hebrew roots movement, or even into Orthodox Judaism, because there are many questions that I know many of you have that I had, and many questions that have been answered for me, and I would hope to answer those for you as well. Of course, let's keep it civil in the comment section. This is not about a fight. This is about trying to find truth. All right, folks, with all that being said, I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Have a blessed week. Shalom.